Okay, part 4 of the Fragger tutorials. We're gonna have a go at creating a tank. Okay, now this is going to be a little bit more complicated than what we've done already, because the tank involves more than just creating a sprite that we will move around on screen. We're going to want to do lots of other things, and one of the main things we're going to want to do is to change settings. So to alter how fast the tank goes and things like that. So there's got to be information that we need to record about this tank. We're also going to want to make multiple tanks, one for each player. And what would be nice is not to repeat any code. So if we can create a tank object that does everything that a tank does, then we can create more than one of those for each player, and they will all use the same code. Okay, so it's quite an efficient way of creating one. But we need to create all the things first. So this is going to be a little bit of a setup video. Okay. Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new class. So go to Project and select Add Class, and we're going to call this class, funnily enough, Tank. It's a good name for it. So when this finishes chugging, bringing up the little dialog box, that's what we're going to call it. So call it Tank and click Add. Okay, there we go. Right, we're just going to put public in front of that. Okay, so it's accessible. And then we need to think about what we need to store. Now, one thing we're definitely going to want in the tank is a sprite that we can manipulate. So we're actually going to store a sprite. So we're going to put public sprite, and remember C# case sensitive. We'll put little tank. Or yeah, we'll leave it like that, tank. Right, it's moaning that it doesn't know what sprite is. That's because we need to include a reference to the engine library. So we have to say at the top, using engine 7. We'll also need the standard XNA framework library, so we'll include that one as well. And also, if we're going to make this move, we need to use the input library to define keys and things like that. So that's Microsoft.xna.framework. Just going to start my clock because I worry about things like that. Framework. Use the picker and input. That's got definitions for keys and things, which we're going to use at some point. Okay, right, so we've got something that will store the actual moving graphic for the tank. What we're also going to store is the colour of the tank. So like I said, we're going to use this for generating more than one tank. So we're going to store a colour, and we'll default that to colour.blue. We can overwrite that later on. Okay. Also, we want like a start position. Where is it going to be displayed? Okay, which is going to be a vector 2. Okay, 2D position on screen, and I'm going to call this start point. Okay, I'm not going to put a value in for that yet because we'll build that later. Now, I've made the tank public and the colour public because I might want to look up those quickly for a particular tank. So I want the public, which means they're accessible. Okay, the start point I've just put vector 2, and what that makes that is private. So only subroutines inside this tank class can refer to start point. Okay, you'll see that in action later on. Ideally we keep as much private, because that's what this by default is, as possible. Okay, it makes things easier to debug. Right, the other thing, we're going to want to point the tanks in different directions. Okay, so we're going to record the angle in degrees that they're going to start at. So that we use a float for, and we're going to call it start angle. Oops. Start angel. Let's put a default in for that. Let's have it. We're going to put a tank here, top left hand corner, when we do a little test on this, and we'll have it. Oh no, we'll leave it at 0 so it faces up. Again, we'll change that in a moment when we've finished a few more items. The other things we're going to need is a set of keys for controlling this, and we're going to give them some sensible names. So the key for forward, and I'm going to put a default in here, keys.up, so that's going to be up cursor key. Let's have one for backwards, so I'm going to call that reverse, and I'm going to use by default key down. So these are keys that we'll be able to overwrite, because we'll need to do that for each player. Let's have rotate left, and we'll call that one left, and again I'm just going to use the cursor keys for these. So this is just storing data, this isn't making anything rotate left and right, not yet anyway. So it's just specifying keys. Okay, and we'll want eventually a shoot key. Keys, we'll call this one fire. Cursor keys we'll use, let's use the M. I'm going to use M for that. You can change it to a different key if you want. You look at the list of keys. Okay, so that's just defining some keys. What we're also going to want, and these are values that you can mess about with and play, we want how fast we go forwards and backwards. So let's use floats for those. Let's have forward speed, and I'm going to set that to 120 pixels per second. I'm also going to have a reversing speed, which I'm going to make slower, and I'm going to make the reversing speed, because tanks are vulnerable, let's make that 30, so a quarter of the forward speed. And we want a rotating speed, so how many degrees per second do we rotate at, and I'm going to set that, I'm going to call it rotate speed, I don't know, 90. So in 4 seconds you'll turn a full circle. Yeah? Right. As we develop this, there'll be extra things that we add. Okay, but they're the values that a tank needs so far. Okay. The other things we need to do, we need to be able to create or construct a tank. So when we create this tank, we're going to specify its colour. Okay, and again, this is just to get us going. So we say public tank. This is known as a constructor, and we're going to have a parameter for this. And what this does is, when we use this, we will say new tank and give a colour. Okay, when we create this tank object, and this is where we're going to store the colour that we want. So we're going to say colour equals tank colour. Okay, so we're saying store here the tank colour that we're given. So that means we don't have to have that default blue, we can change it to whatever colour we want. Okay, now that hasn't created a sprite, we've still got that to do. So what we're also going to do is we're going to add another couple of parameters. Okay. Now these parameters are going to record the starting position as a vector 2 value and the angle. So I'm going to put type vector 2. So this is all in this parameter list, and that's going to be my no, let's not do it. Let's leave it like this for now. We'll create a separate subroutine to do that. So let's create a separate subroutine. Public void set start, we'll call it, and we'll have in there a vector 2, which is our start here. We'll call that parameter, and a float, so turn this much. What you call them is up to you, but you know, sensible names make a difference. So we're going to store the parameter start here in start point. So we're going to say start point equals start here, and our starting angle is going to be whatever we gave as the parameter turn this much. So we're going to say start angle equals turn this much. Okay. Right, the last bit we want to do is create our tank. Now our tank, if we look at our fireworks, let's just load that up. Let's just move that out of my way. In Solution Explorer, if I load up my base textures into fireworks, I'll just pause my video while that's chugging. Okay, well, fireworks finally loaded up. Right, on the texture that we've got, the tank is here. You can't see it very well, so if you select nowhere and change the canvas color temporarily, I'll check it, change it to black. You can see the tank's here. Okay, next to it is the bullet. Right, I'm not going to save this graphic, so it doesn't matter that I've just changed the background color. Alright, so I'm just not going to save it. So when we come to create our sprite back in our game, we're going to use that graphic. It's a naff little graphic, but it looks like a tank. Right, so we're going to create a subroutine, and we're still in tank. So this is going to be called create tank. Now the reason we're doing it like this is because there are multiple times when we want to create a tank. We want to create a tank every time we've been blown up. We want to create a new tank, so we want to create a new sprite each time. Okay, now one thing we must make sure we do is remove any instances that might accidentally be on screen of the current player's tank, and we can do that by saying gm.engine.remove sprite, and then in brackets tank. Okay, remember that's what we called our sprite. Yeah, sprite tank, lowercase. So that's just going to get rid of, and we put a little comment there, remove any previous tanks for this player. Okay, right, so that's just making sure it's gone. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create, so we're going to say gm.engineManager add sprite. So that's going to create a sprite with the engine and store it in our tank sprite. We then need to define the frame, just like we did with the other one. So tank.frame.define. Now this is in our assets TX base texture, and the rectangle, without looking at fireworks for me, is at this location. So x30 y148, and it is 32 by 32. Okay, so it's the same size as the tiles, physically the same size as the tiles that make up my map. Okay. Right, I want to set its start position, so I'm going to say tank.position 2D equals my start point. And remember, I set that here with this subroutine that allowed me to set the start point. I want to set the rotation angle of the tank, so I'm going to say rotation angle equals my start angle. And again, that was set in this subroutine up here. At this point, I'm going to colour it as well, because I specified the tank's colour, didn't I? So I'm going to say tank.wash equals colour. Now, because if we just flip back to fireworks, the tank was drawn in white. If you make things white, you can change the colour of them, okay, by setting the wash. So this is a cheap and quick way of creating one graphic and being able to display it looking different just by changing the colour, which is quite handy, to be fair. Okay, ideally you'd make different tank sprites for each one, but that obviously takes ages and we don't want to mess about doing that, so we're just going to ignore that for now. Right, if we do a F6 just to check that we haven't got any dodgy code in our tank definition, so it's building away. It says there at the bottom left hand corner, build succeeded. So I've got my 1, 2, 3 subroutines. One that creates the simple tank sprite, one that sets the start positions for it, which I use when I create my tank, and one that creates the entire tank object, okay, which looks slightly different to everything else. We don't have void or anything there. This is called a constructor. Okay, and that just specifies a tank colour. Right, to make this exist, we're going to go to play game. So if it isn't open, just double click in Solution Explorer, play game. And where we show the level, what we're going to do here, I'm just going to, this is just temporary, just to test the tank. I'm just going to create a new tank. So I'm going to say new. I'm going to say tank test equals new tank, and it's asking me for the colour, so I'm going to colour dot what should we go with? Cornflower blue, Microsoft blue, that is. So that's going to create a tank, and then now I've got that, a tank called test, I can say create the tank. I haven't set the start position, so let's see what happens when we run this. Alright, so that's just in show level in playgame.cs. I've just created a tank and said create tank. So it should display a tank on screen. Let's just run it and see what happens. Chug, 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 chug. And there you go, right in the top left hand corner there is a tank, because we haven't set the position, and the default position for a tank is 0, 0, or for any sprite it is x 0, y equals 0, which is the top left hand corner. So what we're going to do, we can now test that our spawn thing works, so we can say just before we create the tank, test dot set start, and it wants a vector 2, so we say new vector 2. I'm using the picker so I don't make spelling mistakes, and I just need to specify an x and y position. So I want to just put this in the center of the screen, so I'm just going to put let's just put some numbers in. I'm just going to put 100, 100, so a little in from the top left hand corner. I'm then going to put a comma and set the rotation angle, so I'm going to rotate it 120 degrees, so it should be facing down a little bit and across to the right. Okay, right, so I'm going to run it again just to test that, and that'll be the end of this video, and we'll move on to moving it around. And there you go, there's a nice little tank in a ridiculous blue colour. It looks like it's the same colour that Jean-Claude Van Damme wore in Street Fighter the movie. A tragic film of epic proportions. It had Kylie Minogue in it. And I won't say what Zangief was like. Okay, check it out. Street Fighter the movie. They made a game based on it as well, which was even more tragic than the film. In fact, the most tragic thing was Kylie Minogue's English accent. Yeah, nearly as good as Angelina Jolie's in Tomb Raider. Another tragic film. Okay, that's the end of that video. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll start moving this player tank around. Okay, and then what we ought to do is build into the level data where the tanks should appear on screen. Alright, so that we actually pull that from the data for a level rather than have to work it out manually every time depending on the level, because that would be silly. Okay, thank you very much.